You ever consider raising rabbits in a colony rather than a hutch? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Rednecked video. Again, my name's Chris, and if you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it, which is where we're coming from you today, inside the house, because it's freezing cold outside. I don't know if you can see out the window, but it's snowing pretty good. We got about 5 or 6 inches of snow so far, and it's about 2 degrees outside Fahrenheit right now. I think we're going to actually hit a record low tonight of about 11 degrees below zero, which is a record low for this time of year anyway. So anyway, let's get on to the topic at hand. I've got a lot of questions recently about what my thoughts are on raising rabbits in a colony versus in individual cages in a hutch. So I thought I'd go ahead and address that in video. I know a lot of people think that raising rabbits in a colony is a little bit more natural. They think it's a better lifestyle for the rabbits, that they get to run, they get to play, they get to socialize with other rabbits and all those kinds of things. And that sounds great on the surface. I will preface this by saying I have not raised rabbits in a colony myself. So what I'm going off of is others' experience that I've read about or I've interacted with, and also just my general thoughts on it. But raising rabbits in colonies is not always the best method to do that. There are several disadvantages to raising a rabbit in a colony. One is that does themselves get very territorial, especially does. I mean, rabbits in general can be territorial, but does in particular are very territorial. So that means that if you've got a rabbit, just a whole herd of rabbits running around, there's almost always going to be some kind of fighting that takes place where a dominant doe is trying to assert her dominance over other rabbits. They're fighting over territory, especially if you've got a very small space. You're going to need a very, very large space in order to raise them in a colony. But you're going to see a lot of fighting that goes on between them, and they can get pretty brutal. They can do a lot of damage to each other. So that's one disadvantage of having them in a colony setting, is you can't control that. You won't know it's happening until it's already happened. Another disadvantage to raising them in a colony, in my opinion, is anytime you have animals in contact with the ground, you're going to have a higher risk of disease and of parasites. And that, that's relative to where you live, how big of an issue that is in the area that you live in. You may never have a problem with that, but it is a higher risk when they're in contact with the ground than when they're in cages above the ground, held above the ground. So specifically things like roundworms and things like that would be things I would worry about around here. I know my dog, for example, if I don't have him on worm medication, he gets worms. I mean, that's just, it's going to happen. It happens to every dog out there if I don't have him on a dewormer medication. And it's going to happen with any other animal that you have in contact with the ground. Again, it just depends on what your area is like, and it's all relative to your area. So that would be one thing. And, kind of tagging on to that is that it's much harder in a colony setting to monitor the rabbit's health, to know whether they've got an illness, a disease, whether they're displaying symptoms. I think of things like ear mites that are incredibly common with rabbits, whether you keep them in a cage or in colonies or whatever, you're going to get ear mites in your rabbits. It's pretty easy to treat when they're in a cage system. In a colony, it's much harder to even notice the problem, much less treat it. Trying to catch a rabbit in a colony that's free range, so to speak, and hold it down so you can give it treatment, and then being able to pick out which rabbit that is to treat it again, that can be incredibly difficult to do. Not only that, but if one rabbit in your colony gets sick from something like ear mites or certain illnesses or diseases, it's going to spread through your entire colony incredibly quick. Whereas in a cage system, it's very easy to spot there's an illness going on and isolate that rabbit from the rest of the group before it affects all your other rabbits. Another couple of things that I would be concerned about with raising in a colony is monitoring breeding and when babies are born. In a colony, they can just breed whenever they want to. You're never going to know exactly when it took place. You're never going to know which doe bred with which buck. It's very hard to keep track of all those kinds of things. And not only that, but you're not going to know when the babies are born necessarily, because they will tend to dig a hole in the ground, have their babies in a hole in the ground. You may not even know it until the babies come out of the ground. So if you suffer losses from that litter, you wouldn't even know it to get it cleaned up. And that can be incredibly unsanitary. Another couple of things that I would be concerned about with trying to raise rabbits in a litter would be predators. I already said parasites, but predators would be a problem as well, in that you would have to build pretty strong fences. I mean, rabbits are a prey species in the wild, and everything wants to eat rabbits. So you're going to have to build pretty strong fences. You're going to have to build fences that cannot be dug under, both to keep the rabbits in, keep them from digging their way out, as well as keeping predators from digging their way into your colony setting and having their way. You're going to have to keep the top of the cage, or the colony setting, somehow closed off somewhat, because there are also predators that fly in the air that can get down and get your rabbits, especially young rabbits, baby rabbits. So, to me, there are many disadvantages to raising them in a colony setting. And I know everybody thinks that, the idea is to let them socialize, to let them, interact with other rabbits and run and have fun and play and all those kinds of things. But honestly, rabbits are pretty much solitary animals in the wild. Now, I know European rabbits, where a lot of the bloodlines come from for our domestic rabbits now, are much more social than other kinds of rabbits. Most other kinds of rabbits, the wild rabbits we have here, our eastern cottontails is what we have. They are very social animals. They don't interact except for to breed. That's about it. Now, I know that, like I said, European rabbits are a little bit different. They will form warrens, I believe they call them, in the wild, of up to 15 or 20 rabbits. But, again, although our domestic rabbits now may have originally come from European rabbits, they're not solely that same bloodline of European rabbits. They're not really social creatures. They're not really... And I'm not going to say that you can't raise them in a colony and get them to get along. I'm not going to say you can't have bonded pairs that people talk about. But even with those, there's almost always some kind of fighting that goes on from time to time. Like I said, does in particular will get very territorial of their area. So, that's why I don't raise in a colony. Not to mention the difficulties of keeping it clean, of, just, again, monitoring health and breeding activities and all those kinds of things. To me, caging rabbits has many more advantages over colony raising rabbits. And, particularly when it comes to monitoring the rabbit's health, to treating illness when it comes up, and to breeding, and also feeding the rabbits. This is one thing I didn't mention as a disadvantage of a colony raising, is that, when you're feeding your rabbits in a colony setting, what you tend to get is dominant does that will bully out the other does, and they'll hoard the feed for themselves, not allowing the other rabbits to feed, or to feed freely, so to speak. So, that's a disadvantage there. Whereas in a cage setting, of course, you can monitor how much food the rabbit's taking. You can give them more if they need more. You can cut back if they need less. You can keep track of that. The other advantages to a cage system. If you're using a wire bottom cage where the droppings fall right through, it's much more sanitary than, a colony setting where they're going to be running through their own feces and urine all day long. No matter how much you clean it, you're not going to be able to keep it completely clean. They produce an incredible amount of waste. And so it's much more sanitary in a cage style setting. It's also much easier to monitor their breeding and to keep control of that, especially if you're looking at developing certain traits in your rabbits, or you want to develop a bloodline that you want to prolong. The cage system is almost always the way to do it. You can control which doe breeds with which buck. You'll know which offspring come from which doe, which buck. You'll be able to avoid inbreeding. You'll be able to do line breeding. If you need to do line breeding, you can just control all of those things. And I think that kind of makes sense. And going back to the social aspect of rabbits and how them interact with each other, like I said, most of the time the rabbits really prefer to be by themselves anyway. Our domestic rabbits have been raised in cages for generations upon generations, so they're well adapted to cage life. You don't see the things, the signs of boredom that you see in other animals when you look at the rabbits in a cage. They're not just pacing back and forth the whole time. Most of the time you go out there, they're just lounging about. They're perfectly happy. I know if you let them out, they're going to run, they're going to jump a little bit like that, and there's nothing wrong with, if you want to give your rabbits some exercise, to let them out into an area, to let them run and jump and play and have a good time. But, I really do believe that it's better to keep them in a cage system than it is to keep them in a colony setting. So anyway, this is just, like I said, I've been asked many, many times about this recently. What are my thoughts on colony raising? So those are my opinions on colony raising. It's based off of many people that I've talked to, that I've followed online, that I've seen their videos on, that have tried colony setting, and I've just I made that opinion based on all that because I don't have experience with colony raising rabbits myself. So, I reserve the right to be wrong about some of those kinds of things, but I think if you research it enough, you might find that most of those things are probably true. But again, if you want to raise your rabbits in a colony, and if you've done it and you've been successful with it, then great. Go ahead and keep doing it. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm not telling you not to try it. I'm just giving you my opinion on why you might not want to do it if that's something that you're leaning towards. But, you can always give it a try. There's nothing saying you have to stick with a colony setting. If you try it out and it doesn't work, you can always go back to keeping them in cages if you want to. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, God bless.